Today we resume our Exploring the Branches of Mormon Fundamentalism series. On this episode, I have Josh Thompson on the podcast as we have a conversation about the Apostolic United Brethren, also called the AUB. Now, Josh is the grandson of Rulon C. Allred and has been a member of the AUB his entire life. In our conversation, we talk about the history of the group by discussing presidents of the AUB, starting with Rulon C. Allred down to the present, and exploring notable events that happened during their respective administrations. We then move on to talk about the culture of the AUB, where we discuss their various communities, activities, along with practices around courtship and marriage. We then finish up by having a conversation about doctrines that are held by the AUB, all the while taking time to discuss gospel principles. Stick around for a fascinating conversation on this episode of the Mormon Renegade Podcast. Look, it's no secret that our society has become much more crude and coarse. To become and raise men and women of virtue and character is a Herculean task. To help with this, I have recently wrote and published a book. Now, back in the 1700s, Washington had a book called Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior in Company and Conversation. It was a book with 110 rules that talked about how to conduct yourself like a civilized person in society, something that today's society is sorely lacking. What I did is I went back through the book and I reinterpreted his original sayings for the 21st century. So the book is laid out in a way in which you see Washington's original rule. Right below that is my explanation for the 21st century, and below that you'll find 2 or 3 examples of where to use this in the real world. Now, to go along with this, there's a workbook that helps parents teach these principles and practices to their kids. To find the book, go to MormonRenegade.com, go to the bottom of the page, search out the blog post, and order your copy today. I can bear personal testimony from personal experience that this is an invaluable tool to help you raise men and women of virtue and character.
You're listening to the Mormon Renegade Podcast.
Josh, how's it going, man?
It's going real good. Appreciate the opportunity to do this. We're super early. I'm a little tired, but I'm excited.
I am too. I hear you. But we'll get through this. As we talk here, things will lighten up, I promise. So real quick, have you always been a fundamentalist? Were you born and raised a fundamentalist?
Yeah. So I was raised with 3 moms. I've always had. Actually, well, that's not true. Okay, so I was born with my original dad as a second wife of that one. I was in that family till I was about 5. They had a divorce for a number of reasons, which you may or may not go down that hole. I don't know. But divorced, and then my mom remarried my stepdad now, who had 2 wives. She was the 3rd wife at that point. And so I was brought up in that family, and I feel like I had an awesome childhood. But yeah, fundamentalism is the only religion I personally have ever known. I think we all kind of go through our own little faith crisis type thing where we decide, is this what we're going to do and what we're not? So I guess in my heart, technically, there would have been a little phase where I was most kind of unsure, trying to figure things out.
Sure.
But yeah, I've definitely been in it my whole life.
Right on.
Yeah.
3 moms.
Polygamy. What was that?
3 moms. You didn't get away with anything as a kid, did you?
You could say that. Yeah. We did live separate. My specific family was a little more blessed than a lot of polygamous families. So, because every wife was able to have their own house, but we also lived house to house to house on one piece of property. So it's like they had their own space, their own room, but we were all really close to each other. And the kids kind of, we were able to just go to the other houses sleep over, because obviously when you have a polygamous family, you have siblings that are your own age that you hang out with.
Right.
Yeah, it was really good.
Did you attend public school or?
Yeah, so my family was quite a bit different, and I know I've kind of talked to you about this and said I'm not sure that I would have been the best person for the interview, because I'm a little bit on the outside even to this day. My family was one of the few to actually do public school clear from the beginning, like preschool clear up, because we actually do have a school system in our religion. We just didn't do it. And actually, I'm not 100% sure why that is. I've never really thought about that or asked my parents. It's just how my family always was. We always went to the public school system. But yeah, so we were always really involved out in the world type aspects.
Mm-hmm.
But also we were involved in our religion as well. We weren't inactive by any means.
Sure. So at what point do you remember going to school and then having that general realization like, oh, geez, maybe my family's a little bit different than everybody else's? Was there ever that moment?
That definitely had to have happened, but I honestly can't recall it. And that probably could be because the public school system that I went to actually had really good relations with my faith, because we had a community it was just a few miles away from that. And we actually had teachers that were from our community that taught at the public school system. So I think just because everybody knew each other, we had good relationships with the public school system. It wasn't ever anything that I felt like I had to be secretive or hide about. Just everybody always knew it.
Yeah.
So I don't think I ever had them.
And that's one thing about the AUB, and for anyone listening, that's what we're going to cover today is the AUB. That's one of the things about the AUB that I think I kind of always looked at and thought was kind of cool was while they definitely had their faith community, they weren't necessarily insular, right? They'd get out there and you could tell, and I thought that did wonders, right? Because that allows people to kind of see that, okay, their family arrangement's a little bit different, but at the end of the day, they're still people, right?
Yeah. I've always felt like that's a big thing that really sets us. We're a community and a faith that if you were to see us on the streets, there's nothing really recognizable about us. You wouldn't know who we were.
Right.
And we're always very involved in local government, creating jobs. In fact, the area that I work at, I'm in the EMS system and work as a paramedic in central Utah. And this community, like half of our EMS is people in my religion for the whole community. So we're definitely very involved. In some senses, we are very insular, because there are some obvious things that really set us apart. But I would think it's more cultural than anything, and just what's happened over time. I wouldn't say it's been intentional, but we definitely started as more insular, and then it's slowly become more and more trying to get away from that. And I have my own personal opinions on that. I feel like that's happened in a large part because I don't know the reasons behind this, but I like to be as intellectually honest as I can. There's something about closed religions or cults. I say my religion is a cult by the actual definition. It is. There's no way around it. Whether I believe in it, but it's still a cult. But it feels like things like child molestation and a lot of unfortunate things tend to happen in social systems like that. And so I feel like the AUB specifically has made a very strong effort to be involved and to be forward about things and communicate on things. I know even the Attorney General of Utah, the leadership for my religion has some type of a relationship with that. I'm not quite sure, just to try and make sure that the state knows we're not trying to hide things. We want to be very open about these issues. because it does happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. And as I decided to do this podcast, as I kind of felt like I received the call to do this podcast, let me say it like that.
Yeah.
I asked, what's one of the end goals here? What is it this we're going to try to do here? And one of it, a big part of it was, we need to get out there and kind of tell our story, right? All of us, because if we don't, we're going to let somebody else tell our story. Okay.
Exactly.
And it's not going to necessarily be the truth. The other thing is this idea of, as I looked at what happened down in Colorado City, I came to understand real quick, nothing good happens when you force a people into the shadows, right? Because you force them into the shadows, and there's always some sort of dictator or tyrant who stands ready to exploit that. And so the best thing that can be done is to shine a light out there, right? The other thing is as Mormon fundamentalists, I believe that we do have a specific calling to keep truths alive, right? To keep principles, practice alive. And it's hard to do what the Savior asked us to do in being that light on the hill if we're constantly putting a bushel over our light. And so as I started this podcast, it was like, okay, we're going to kick some doors down. I want to be able to let the light in, so to speak, a little bit, because I think we do live in a time now. Well, here's a good example. Me and my wives, Amber and Tanya, we were sitting on the couch, and it was June, so it was Pride Month. And I just remember looking at the girls going, do you remember the time when it was our marital situation that was the weirdest? Right. And so now I think we live in a time where I think we should, and probably have a responsibility to let our light shine a little bit more than maybe in the past. I feel like we owe a debt of gratitude to the former generation who kept these things alive for us. And now we're in a different time, and we have a different mission now. And that includes being more open and being more willing to talk to people.
Yeah. I think with that openness, I think my group does have a bit of a different mentality, which is actually one of the reasons I was kind of struggling with thinking about who might even do this interview. That I was saying, you might only get lucky if you get someone that's actually left the faith. The AUB has more of the mentality of, we don't want to be public about it. A lot of the TV shows nowadays are people from our religion who most people of our own faith weren't very happy that they decided to make a TV show about it. And we also don't want polygamy to be legal because we feel like it would be taken advantage of at that point. So we're actually happy that it's not legal. I think it was temporarily, and then it became illegal again. I'm not quite sure where that is in the state of Utah right now.
Right now, what it looks like is that they have they basically made it like a jaywalking ticket, right?
Yeah.
And what I get the feeling is that they use it in cases where they suspect that there is abuse going on, right? So if you're just a guy with a couple wives trying to make your way in the world, you're going to be left alone by and large, right? If you're doing some shady stuff and the authorities get wind of it, well, then that's the tool that they will use to go investigate it.
Okay, that actually sounds true, because I was told that the Attorney General had told the leader of our faith, he's passed away now, but when he was, that they would not be coming after the AUB at all. It was mostly just meant for, from what I understand, mostly meant for fathers that are marrying minors, or there's sexual abuse and things like that, like something like a way to tax on more years. I don't understand all the laws behind it, but something along that lines.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'll be honest. I won't name names, but there is someone from the AG's office here in Utah that listens to the podcast.
Oh, cool.
He's kind of a fan of it. He's donated to the podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a great guy. We've had a couple of good conversations, and when I first got that email, though, I'm like, am I being punked? Right? That was my first thought, right? But so I called him up, but no, he's a fan of the show. He donates, he subscribes, he's, and we'll have really good conversations from time to time. And so I'm kind of proud of that fact a little bit, that it's been able to bridge some of those gaps a little bit and
awesome,
and be able to be out there a little more. So I've done a couple episodes here, and what I've been doing, Josh, is we've done some episodes where we've talked a lot about the history of fundamentalism, really starting with like Musser, because I feel like a lot of us, not all, but I would say a good 95 to 97% of us, I would say, probably at some point trace our lineage back through Musser when it comes to priesthood. And
that's probably true. Yeah.
Yep. And so the man was an absolute stud. Like as I look at fundamentalism, I'm like, that dude was the OG and just a stud. But anyway, as we've done that, we've gotten to the point to where and I think this is where the AUB's history would pick up, is, Musser ordains Rulon C, Allred, and some of that second group, I guess you could say. And so there's a split that happens between a lot of us up here in the north and some of us in the south, right? Where that split happens. And so I'd really like to pick up from there, if you're comfortable doing that.
Yeah. Now I would like to point out, I don't know if I mentioned this, but Rulon is my grandfather, Rulon Allred.
That you did mention that, which was absolutely cool when I heard that. So, excuse me. So Rulon gets ordained, and things kind of kick off from there. Now, immediately after that, I don't think he just sets up another church, right? He doesn't like automatically form the AUB. It's kind of a subset of folks, I guess. I don't know. You got thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, from my understanding of it, it's not so much. Well, first up, I guess I should clarify that we're talking about the same thing here. Are you talking about like the group AUB as like making an official religion, or when we decided to become a legal entity?
Well, aspect, or kind of before that, what was the state of I guess in those days it was called the Allred group, right?
Yeah. Most people on the outside actually still know us by the Allred group over the AUB group, I think. So, but yeah, the Allred group as well, especially at that time. So this is my understanding of what happened. This is what I've been told. So, Joseph Musser wanted to call my grandfather Rulon Allred to the council. The members of the council at that time, John Y. Barlow, which is, or is that before or after? I got to think about this. John Y. Barlow was a member of the council. Okay, so John Y. Barlow, who is actually my great grandfather on a different side, was a member of that council. Was it Lewis Kelch? You know these names, right? I would imagine.
Yep.
Not going to get them all at the top of my head. But so Joseph White decided to put my grandfather, Rulon Allred, on the council. The entire council disagreed with that. I'm actually not sure why that reason is, because Rulon Allred was a very respected person. So I don't think it had to do with his character. But for one reason or another, that's what happened. Essentially, Joseph Musser says to the council, well, God has told me that he needs to be on this council, so you can either accept it or I can essentially just release you. So that put him on the council. The council didn't accept it, and so Joseph Musser released everybody. And so that council is where you actually get eventually what becomes the Warren Jeffs group. From my understanding, it wasn't that bad when they first started. It kind of developed into what it was, especially after Warren Jeffs. But then you get the Allred group under my grandfather Rulon, and then eventually they called more council members, and so we got this split all after my grandfather was called. I've been also told that that wasn't the only thing. There was also a lot of tension under the surface that kind of boiled up, and that just kind of really exploded it. Things like underage marriages, arranged marriages, and things along those lines.
Right.
And I'm sure there's other things as well.
I talked with Stephen Nielsen, and he's on the priesthood council in the Nielsen Nailers, and they're a split from first the Colorado City group down there, the FLDS. Then they split off from the Second Ward or Centennial Park, and he said something that I thought was pretty profound, and I tend to agree with him, is that we don't have a lot of good records of that time period.
Exactly, right? That's the hard thing.
And so what I think we get a lot of times is kind of the he said, she said stuff at this point in the game, right? Where I don't think any of us really know what happened for sure. There obviously was something that happened, but it definitely was a tumultuous time. So as the Allred group, before they're incorporated into the AUB, how are they functioning during this time?
Let's clarify that question. Because you said the Allred group, when they're in the AUB, that those are the same group. What exactly are you trying to ask?
What I'm saying is before they became the AUB, right? Before they incorporated it into a church.
Yeah.
How is the Allred group functioning then?
Oh, okay. So at that time, that would have been a lot more people meeting at people's houses. In fact, there was one particular really popular house to meet at. I can't quite recall the name. I'm trying to remember. But it was very common for people just to meet at people's houses. It was definitely... at that point, we were still a lot more disorganized. I feel like most people that listen to your podcast probably already know this, but just in case, there's kind of like a mentality that the fundamentalist Mormons are not the church. They're not going to organize as a specific church-like group. Mm-hmm. And I think at that time we were a lot more still into that mentality, and over the years because groups congregate together that have the same mentality, we slowly form these different groups, AUB especially.
Right. As I've read it sounds a lot like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, mm-hmm. It sounds like there's a lot of like extracurricular meetings that are happening, so folks would go to the LDS church, take sacrament, get baptized, do their endowments in the LDS temple, and then they would have like extra meetings off to the side somewhere, right? And that's kind of how they operated for a number of years, right?
Yeah.
And when I had a guy on the podcast, his name was Charles Orson, who was old enough. He was a young man when your grandfather was still around, and an older guy. And he talks about, and this is the part that I find fascinating, is that in today's fundamentalism, if you will, we get this feeling of there must have been tremendous animosity between the LDS church and fundamentalists. But I think what we see there is that wasn't necessarily the case. There's a lot of evidence to support a couple of things, and Charles Orson really illuminated that, which is the LDS church right up to David O. McKay would send people towards Rulon Allred to talk about these early teachings. Have you heard something similar to that?
Um, I don't know if it's the same context that you were thinking about, but I know that if people from the church are listening to this, they're probably going to strongly disagree with this. Well, I'll just say this is what I've been taught, and this is what I understand to be true. That
I named the podcast what I did for a reason. They know what to get.
Yeah. I wouldn't know exactly up to what president it was, but for a very long time, people that were interested in polygamy would be sent by the apostleship of the church to people like Joseph Musser. They couldn't condone it because it's the church body, not the priesthood body, and we believe that those are separate. So essentially, they would just kind of beat around the bush with the issue and say, well, if you really want to know anything, talk to so and so, and then they talk to Brother Joseph Musser and find out, well, actually, it is okay to live polygamy. The church just can't condone it, and that's quite a subject. I'm sure most fundamentalists are quite familiar with that whole history and kind of that beating around the bush. Is kind of comical, like the Reed Smoot hearing cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was fascinated by Joseph F. Smith. He was one that I always found fascinating because people would approach him and be like, hey, we think we're being called to live plural marriage. And then he would say, well, if you can find someone to do it, then God bless you. Right. The ceremony. And then they would be, that couple would go on their way and be like, well, what the hell was that? And then like magically a few days later, someone would be like, hey, you have an appointment to meet Musser or somebody else. So it was a fascinating time in Mormonism that I wish we had a few more records on. But yeah, it was kind of one of those things where it was like, hey, you can't do that, wink wink, and then off they went, right? So
yeah.
So I do find it very interesting. At what point does the quote Allred group become the AUB?
So that's something I definitely have no idea on. I'm not sure. From what I understand, though, the only reason that it happened was for legal reasons. I mean, there's taxes and things like that to come into account when you're doing things like tithing. So it had to be done at some point. I know a lot of people were upset about it, didn't want it to be. In fact, to this day, it's still not the ideal. It's not really, we don't want it to be a legal entity, but we believe in trying our best to obey the laws and work with the law and things like that. And so here we are,
right?
Legal entity,
right? So, do most members of the AUB kind of consider the AUB to still be kind of, and this is the vibe I get. So if I read this wrong out of history, let me know. Yeah. But I get the feeling almost like in those early days and for a long time, the AUB thought of itself more like an auxiliary to the LDS Church. Is that a fair assessment?
I think I might get a little bit where you're going with this, but I wouldn't say an auxiliary. Probably one of the biggest things that separates the AUB from other fundamentalist groups is that we still uphold President Nelson as the rightful president of the church. We still believe in the LDS Church. We believe all the keys to the church are still there, that it hasn't fallen away. We believe it's gone off track, but not fallen. So we support the church 100%, even if they don't support us, obviously. But we believe that they hold the keys to the church, which would be subordinate to the keys of the priesthood, which we believe that we do hold the rightful keys to the priesthood, and that the one man, we use that phrase, the one man who holds all the keys to the kingdom on this earth is the leader of our faith. And that President Nelson holds the rightful keys to president of the church. So 2 separate keys. Or is it trying to go with that? But yeah, that's a big difference, especially between the church and I don't know if other fundamentalist groups are the same in that. I would think they are. Maybe you can tell me, you might know more, but just that there's that separation between keys of the priesthood and keys of the church that can actually be held by two separate people.
I know that there's a couple groups that believe that the LDS church has gone completely off the rails. And so there's a few groups that make the assertion that, hey, no, their time has passed, and we hold all the keys to everything. And then you have some who feel like they just had an alternate organization functioning at the same time the church was, right? So that's maybe some of the LeBaron claims in some ways, almost two distinct churches, if you will. That's
the church of the firstborn.
Exactly.
What they call it. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it ranges widely depending on who you're talking to. I think most independents probably look at it as, the church is going to do their thing. And during that 8-hour meeting there, they were told not to set up another church, and so they're not going to do that, right? And just going to operate on the DL, have home church, or sneak in the back and partake of the sacrament at the LDS church. That's the other thing that's been fascinating about fundamentalism, is that there's really not a one size fits all sort of a deal here, right?
There's a lot of different types. Yeah,
there's a lot of different types for sure. So I think that covers pretty well the history that I really wanted to dive into. So you have that split that happens between the fundamentalists down south and up north. The folks down south would become the FLDS, and I want to make it clear that the FLDS weren't always under the Jeffs family, right? Certainly,
they used to be very different.
Certainly, when Leroy Johnson was there, and then John Y. Barlow, it functioned a lot differently, and you get the sense that those two men really loved their people. And I've made the assertion here before, and I'm going to keep doing it because I think it's important, because I think it's an important overall thrust of the podcast, is that it doesn't get bad for those folks down there until the Short Creek raids, right? And then they force them into the shadows, and as soon as they're in the shadows, there's somebody lurking, being like, I told you, they're coming for you. You got to listen to me to keep you safe. And that's where things go bad. And then you have the folks up north, the Allred group, who'd become the AUB, who eventually kind of become what they are today. Now, Rulon Allred was eventually assassinated by Ervil LeBaron. Who takes over at that point, Josh?
So after Rulon Allred is shot, and I'm sure most people listening to this are probably familiar with that story. At that point, his brother Owen Allred, he takes over at that point. So for the most part, as far as succession goes, if nothing is said on the matter, it will go to the most senior. But people can also be appointed. So the most senior definitely isn't an always thing like it is in the LDS Church. I'm not sure how other groups work with that as far as succession goes, but I think that one, though, however, was a matter of seniority, being the oldest person. So Owen Allred is the next person.
Right. And now there was a bit of a succession, I won't say crisis, but there was another break-off group from
there is pretty much every time a new person gets put up, there's somewhat of one, for sure.
In that original, after Rulon was assassinated, I believe that's where the branch, or the Peterson group, begins as well, right? Where Gerald Peterson branches off. Was there go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm actually not 100% sure of that. That might be correct. I have a friend from the Peterson group, and we've never talked about that before, but that I could be correct. I'm not sure on that one, but I will say every time there's a new somebody appointed, it feels like there's like somewhat of a small break off. So I wouldn't be surprised.
That seems to be par for the course, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. I think that really is indicative of the mentality. I think what's interesting is most fundamentalist religions are uh, very, not just Mormonism, but in general, tend to have more control. Um, but when you see these splits up always happening, I think that's indicative of something that's really unique. I don't know if this is how it is in the most fundamentalist groups and their way of thinking, but in ours, it really is. And that is the extremely strong emphasis on agency, free thinking, doing what you want to do type of a thing. Um, so it makes sense that would happen. I feel like I don't know. I hate to say it that I know this, but based upon people that I have spoken to that have left other fundamentalist religions and they look at our religion, the AUB is extremely liberal, very liberal. In fact, I've read our Wikipedia page. Whoever wrote our information on there, and they said the world refers to us as the liberal branch of fundamentalism. So yeah, very free thinking. So I think that makes sense that people break away every time we get a new person.
Sure. And you, oftentimes I've wondered how much of that is a product of doctrine versus personality, right?
Yeah.
What those splits entail, right? Is this a doctrinal issue or is this a personality deal, right?
Yeah.
And you'd hope in all that, and as I've talked to fundamentalists, the thing that's always been surprising, and I think I'll always consider myself somewhat of an outsider to Mormonism, always, because I'm a convert to the LDS Church.
Yeah.
Then I became a fundamentalist. Is that there's more that unites us than separates us, right? And sometimes it's a bit frustrating to be like, okay, we may not hug it out on Sundays, but every other day of the week we should be looking at ways we can work together, because as we're arguing about either who's the man or certain pet doctrines, if you will, and we're arguing about those, the real enemy's kicking down the door and setting the building on fire, right? And so I'm like, sometimes I think we take that too far, and sometimes I've wondered if those splits are always necessary. It's made me wonder a little bit. So what was Owen like? Do you get any sense of what Owen was like?
So for the most part, Brother Owen was before my time, but I was alive as a toddler. And let's see, what year did Brother Owen die? I actually think he died in I want to say 2001, the year of the towers. I know he died on Valentine's Day, if I remember correctly. It seems like I remember it being Valentine's Day. But I do remember listening to him speak at our conferences. I remember he was typically a very soft-spoken person until he talked about polygamy and wives and women and how husbands treat their wives, and he would just go ballistic. Like, he was really a pulpit pounder. Yeah, he would literally just pound that pulpit and start yelling at the men, yeah. Like at church, and like everybody, like talking about how he was just sick and tired of random women coming to him complaining about their husbands, and just that the husbands needed to be more loving and kind. And I feel like as men, we've gotten better at being better husbands in our religion, and I think a lot of that has to do with the culture and how we're a patriarchal system. But yeah, he was a very loving individual. He loved to yell. But I also remember being in a big line with all the kids in my community, and we all got to take a turn just to go up and shake his hand and give him a hug, because he just really loved all the kids, and he wanted to see everybody and get a chance to say hi. And I remember just sitting in that line for like an hour with my mom, and I don't know how old I was, but I had to have been pretty darn young, like five, somewhere between 5 and 10. And I remember not feeling annoyed, like generally wanting to go to go up and see this guy, because he was just a really, really kind person. Yeah. I'm probably biased on that because he was a leader of my own religion, but that's the impression that I had. And everybody that I know definitely loved him as well. He's a very good person.
That's awesome. I gotta be honest. I wish I could have been there for some of those pulpit pounding sessions where he's
Oh
giving.
yeah, I remember.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm always a fan of when they start singeing your eyebrows with a little bit of fire. I'm kind of a fan of that. That's where usually some good doctrine gets expounded.
Amen. Yeah.
So and it's under Owen that I believe the AUB comes into itself proper, right? And so
yeah.
during that time, does it begin to start feeling more like a church and less like a collection of individuals? Are there building programs that happen? Do you guys start building temples or chapels or stuff like that?
I would actually say that it was probably before Owen.
Okay.
Obviously, I was not alive at that time, but I say that because under my grandfather, Rulon Allred, we get the community of Pinesdale, which they really wanted to be a close knit community there and just have their people there. So we have that church building there built. We also have our RCA building in Bluffdale, which actually, now that I'm thinking about that, I think that I'm not sure what year that was built, but I want to say it was when my grandfather was still president, but don't quote me on that.
Okay.
So I would think that it was actually under Rulon Allred that we started to become a bit more like that. It obviously solidified more Brother Owen Allred, and we've gotten quite a number of other communities that have developed. We actually have quite a bit of communities. We're not just local to one spot. So
now Pinesdale's in Montana, is that correct?
That's true. And that's the community that I grew up in. We're pretty close to the nose. Montana's got a face.
Right. Yep. Right there by Idaho.
Yeah, we're like the booger of Montana there. So
I've always said that portion of. So I spent my teenage years in Idaho, in western Idaho, and I always thought that section there looked like Joe Biden trying to sue somebody. So, but what was that like growing up in Pinesdale? Now, let me say this. Let me ask this before you answer that question. Was Pinesdale a effort to live a united order, or was it just a community?
It was an effort to live the united order, sure, yeah. But I was really young during that time, so I personally was not part of that effort. My dad was, and he really, really struggled. People that haven't lived united order, and people that have will definitely know this. Living united order is darn near impossible. With dealing with just being human. So unfortunately, it chased my dad away from it, not from our religion, he's still a member, but from trying to live united order. So you don't have to be in an order if you're in the AUB, but it's a vehicle to live the law of consecration, which we do covenant to live the law of consecration.
Yep.
But yeah, it was a united order. At this point, Pinesdale, with the advent, going quite a bit forward in your history there, with the advent of Lynn Thompson being appointed leader, there was a big split there. So now in Pinesdale, we have our group there, what they would call the Marvites there, but Brother Marvin's dead. I don't know what they call themselves now. And then members of the church, and then just everybody else that's just not affiliated in any way. It's a very split community at this point.
Gotcha. So is there still AUB up there in Pinesdale, or is it?
Yeah, there is, and they still have a fully functioning group there, and they hold their meetings there. We actually had our last conference up there, which hadn't been done in quite a long time after the split. This last one was the first one to do that and to try and reestablish some of those relationships and keep things going there.
Okay.
So yeah, there is a functioning AUB group there still.
Awesome. And then if it's not, if you're comfortable with it, I know that maybe some of that you might want to keep on the DL. So I want to respect that. But do you have other efforts like that in the AUB underway, different communities and that sort of stuff?
Just like as far as starting other communities goes.
Yeah.
That's perfectly okay to talk about. So the group I'm a part of, well, I wouldn't say it's new. I moved here when it was new because I wanted to be a part of a new community growing, and we're in Mount Pleasant, Utah. So we have a fully functioning group here. I can't think. Actually, that's not true. Another group after that started out in Moab. We got a group there, and I think we actually that one's probably expected to really start growing here coming up shortly. They're not like right in the middle of the city by any means. They're way on the outskirts, from what I understand. But I can't think of any other communities right at the top of my head, though. I do want to say this just because I feel like a lot of people, because I did say Moab and gave a specific city, just in case people from Moab ever listen to this. Because I feel like people always kind of get a little ballistic when they find out a polygamous community is moving to their area. Until they get to know us. I look at Mount Pleasant, the area that we grew up in. The community does not want us here at all, and they made it very well known, from being kicked out of the church when some of our members wanted to go there just to attend a sacrament meeting. They were kicked out, to outright rallies and things in the newspaper, meetings, town hall meetings, and things like that. It was pretty crazy here for a while. But over the years, I feel like we've really earned their respect and their trust, and vice versa. We take a large role in jobs here. Some of the biggest companies here from people from our work. We try to be a lot more involved in the actual local government here. We're not secretive, and so I feel like we have really good relations now, and I feel like that's happened with every place that we've established. We see that same thing in Pinestyle, like I was mentioning earlier. We have really good relations with the local school system, and people just know us. They just it's not something we had to be secretive about. So if people from Moab are listening to this and they want to worry about that, I wouldn't worry about that with the AUB. You'll find that we're a lot more of a liberal group. So. And by liberal, I mean liberal compared to Mormon fundamentalism, not liberal politically.
Right. Yeah, no, that's an important connotation.
Yeah.
So,
we're very conservative politically.
Yeah, no, and Mount Pleasant's beautiful area. I'm a land surveyor by profession, and I've done a couple of surveys out by Indianola and Mount Pleasant and that area out there, and it's always been a great area to be in.
Yeah.
And I'll say this as well, Josh, is that I think that's pretty common across the board, where people get nervous when they hear about, this polygamous sect coming into their community. As I talked with that gentleman from the branch, the Peterson group, they have a settlement out in just outside of Tonopah, and at first it was a little dicey, right? And then as they got settled and they saw, hey, they're just trying to make their way through the world like the rest of us.
Our lives. Oh, yeah.
Yep.
But it really is understandable. I feel like the AUB has a lot of understanding, because we do get that stigma of war and Jeffs. That's what's in the news. And the fathers love their daughters, and they're not going to want their daughters around a bunch of dirty, horny men that are just looking for a bunch of women. And that's kind of the stigma that a lot of people view us as, unfortunately, which obviously is not the case.
No, I think you're 100% correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that Jeffs is going to have to answer for in the hereafter, is that not only did he make his people's life hard and miserable, which is enough, but he made it tougher for the rest of us. Right.
Yeah, really did. Yeah.
He made it tougher for the rest of us to make our way through the world a little bit. And I feel like in some respects, it's now incumbent upon guys like ourselves and other fundamentalists, or I should say the vast majority of fundamentalists who aren't into creepy crap, to rectify that problem now. Right.
Exactly.
I know when I became a polygamist and a fundamentalist, I had a buddy who said, "So are your wives going to wear those prairie dresses?" And I was like, "Only on Tuesdays." I mean, just two.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but no, I think we got a work to do there, definitely, in repairing some of the optics, if you will, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So after Owen passes, who takes over then? Is that when Lynn Thompson becomes the president?
Almost. So after Brother Owen passes away, then we have Brother Lemoyne Jensen.
Okay.
I want to say Joseph or Lemoyne's actually not his first name, but we just called him that. I'm not sure. We always refer to him as Brother Lemoyne. Brother Lemoyne, though. He was one of those very soft-spoken people as well. He's not somebody that I heard really yell, but he definitely spoke with vigor and passion. But he was also somebody that I looked at and I just thought, wow, that's somebody I hope I can aspire to be like someday. Just a very loving person. He never knew me, but personally, I never knew him personally, but one incident always stands out to me when I was a lot younger. Just randomly running into church and him coming up to me and just shaking my hand and then just saying that he loved me. And him just saying that to me just always stuck with me. He was a very loving person. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, I wish I could have known him more, but I'm somebody that's a little bit more I'm very involved in my religion, but as a lay member, as far as the higher up stuff goes, I'm just I don't know a lot of those things that go on. So well, I didn't get the chance to really know him.
I think that's indicative of Mormons everywhere. We want to do our callings. We want to serve, but at the same time, we want to keep our head down so we don't get something worse called. so I think that's ubiquitous across all of Mormonism. So how long was Lemoyne Jensen the president of the AUB?
I'm definitely not sure on the exact number of years on that one. But if Brother Owen died in 2001, which I don't want to be quoted on that one because I'm not 100% sure on that. Just what's in my head. And Brother Lynn was put in not too long ago. So Brother Lynn has passed away also. And he only served for like maybe 3 years, I want to say. So yeah, so almost 20 years, I would imagine. Brother Lemoyne was the head of the priesthood in our group. Maybe not quite 20 years. Just trying to run through that in my head.
No, sure. You're good. And the dates aren't really important.
We don't memorize them.
Yeah, no. The dates aren't important. It's what happens during maybe their administration. Because and again, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's during Lemoyne Jensen's administration that you start to see that there's this, for lack of a better term, fundamentalist moment beginning to happen, because it's under his administration that we see shows like Sister Wives come out.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so she was. Sorry, I was just going to say, I think Robin's actually my cousin from one of my other mothers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, an outstanding person. I just want to say this because I read so many rude things that people say on YouTube, and it just bugs me to know. Like, people that aren't in polygamy, like, they don't understand how hard it is. And like, I look at that family and I look at how they're breaking apart and all the negative comments are said about it. Obviously there's faults that happened. I feel like Cody says some things that I think, I probably wouldn't have said that. But people that live this way of life, and obviously as well, like, it's not a cakewalk. It is super hard. And it's just, I feel like people in the world, they just don't get it. You don't understand how hard it is. So I feel sad for the family and Robin, especially because I kind of know her as an outstanding person with great character. It's sad to see what's happened with that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they're in our religion.
But here's the thing, right? And this is one thing I do want to give props for, is that they were some of the first that kind of started kicking down some doors a little bit, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And I think that I do think that maybe there was a price to be paid there, unfortunately, because it's never easy to live under public scrutiny.
Yeah. Especially
And
with that way of life on top of it.
and the other thing I would say is that as I've talked to other people who have been on similar reality shows, I find that can't get enough of the Mormon Renegade podcast? Well, good news. We're on Patreon, and there's 3 packages that you can choose from. The first one, the Slightly Rowdy package, allows you to hear the podcast without all those pesky commercials getting in the way. For those who want a slightly more in-depth experience, there's the Stirring It Up package, where you can hear ad-free audio, ad-free video, and transcripts. Finally, for those who want to go full Renegade, that package is available too, where you can get everything in the previous 2 packages, plus an extra show where myself and Ben Winfield break down the news of the day from a very Mormon point of view. You will also get exclusive access to Renegade Chat, and on there you'll be able to talk to others about the show or whatever topics are on your mind. Go to Patreon today and get your exclusive content. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by DeseretFlag.com. I've said this before and I really mean it. Mormonism isn't just a religion, it's a culture. As such, it has its own vernacular and practices, but also its own symbols. And those symbols become even more important and prominent when you look back into our history. Perhaps one of the most recognizable symbols of Mormonism is the Deseret flag. This is the flag that I use as cover art in this podcast. This was also used for a good chunk of time during the pioneer era in Utah. Now, today we have people who want to replace the existing Utah flag with some other progressive monstrosity. Well, I think it's damn past time that we start pushing back here a little bit in Utah. Our friends at Defending Utah are here to help you with that. Now, if you go to DeseretFlag.com, you can now purchase your own Deseret State flag. It's time here that we start making ourselves known and join the resistance against those who seek to rewrite our state's history. Go to DeseretFlag.com or check out the link in this episode's page show notes and get yours today. The producers of that show have a vested interest in there being drama.
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
And I've often wondered how many of those things in the course of everyday life would be things that would be worked out really easily when the cameras weren't around. But because they have to generate drama in order to keep eyes on the TV, it exacerbates problems.
Yeah, I thought about that too. Like just the fact that they know they're on camera is going to alter how they're going about the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
no, it was a brave, bold move that they did. I mean, as much as I'm all for being open and honest and transparent, the last thing I want is a bunch of cameras running through my house. I'm kind of grumpy anyway. So, I mean, if I came home from work, sweating outside in July at 90 degrees and I see a camera in my doorway as I first walk in, I'm probably going to give that thing, the old shake as I walk through and then, tell me. Yeah. So
I wouldn't dare to do that in a million years. Our way of life is so hard. And honestly, I just wouldn't want the world to see me in my weaknesses like that, because marriage brings out your weaknesses really bad. It's really hard to overcome.
It's the perfect mirror for exposing some of your flaws, right? Whether that's selfishness, whether that's your temperament, any of those things. And if you're humble enough, I think, and willing to take the criticism that comes your way at times, it can be a very beautiful vehicle to refine a person.
Absolutely.
But I think it's that humility that is so desperately needed. I know when living plural marriage, it helps me become a better husband, right? Because sometimes it's easy when it's just you and another wife to just want to stand your ground, right? It's just two people arguing. When there's someone else who's like, you might be wrong here, you may want to check at the door, it causes a little bit of more introspection and like, wow, maybe I am being an ass, right? and so you step back and you have to take stock of who you are, and then and then make those changes. The blessing comes, though, I think, Josh, in that, and I don't know what your experience has been, in those times I've had that that introspection, a lot of growth happens and love increases. But if you're not humble enough to be called out on your BS, so to speak, it can be a rough thing for sure.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I'm sure pretty much everybody in LDS history has heard at one point or another that polygamy will damn more people than it will save. If you're not on top of the game and you're not actively trying to be a better person, actively trying to be humble, and actively communicating, you're going to get ripped apart. It really forces you to either make the choice to be that patient, loving husband and father, or to go the other way because you can't handle the pressure and give up, blow up. And unfortunately, with what happens, I dare say most polygamous families, they end up breaking apart because there's just an insurmountable of stress, emotional pain for the wives, insurmountable stress for the husbands. It is really, really stressful when your wives disagree. In fact, it's more stressful when your wives disagree with each other than it is when all of your wives disagree with you. It's like your wives can be on the same page. You can deal with that.
Right.
And it makes you or breaks you. And you really have to be on top of it and trying to be a good person and build your character.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of what we were talking about earlier. It's not what people think. It's not like the husband is just the head of the family. They say do this and everybody obeys their will. It's really trying to communicate and have a functioning unit between the husband and the wives. It's hard.
Yeah, no, I get emails from time to time, and once I got an email from a lady who basically called me every name you could think of, and then I was like, you should come take a look at my house, right? If you think that I'm the heavy-handed patriarch that runs around here with my chest out, you should take a look at how often I get my ass handed to me. So, yeah, no, I definitely, but I also want to say this. It is a lot of work, a lot of responsibility, but the blessings that come from living this way are just absolutely divine. I don't know how else to put it. It absolutely is divine. And if when there's unity, I've often sat back and looked, and I'm really blessed. I should say this up front. I am super blessed. My wives get along great. They really do.
That makes the world of difference. Yeah.
Ton of difference. And as you know, and sometimes they get united around, playfully poking at me a little bit, right? Like they call the podcast my third wife, right? They're very good natured and they support me and what I got to do. And really they're so much better than I am, Josh. Like sometimes I'm like, you two should do the podcast. People would like you a lot better than they like me.
Yeah.
But no, I'm really blessed that way. All right, moving back along here. So Lemoyne dies, and then Lynn Thompson takes over. Anything of within the AUB during his administration that's really noteworthy?
So that actually was an extreme upheaval in our religion.
Really?
That's where we get the split in Pinesdale that I was talking about earlier. So Brother Lynn gets called, and he's actually called not by seniority, but by direct calling from Brother Lemoyne before Brother Lemoyne passes. And Brother Lynn just lost it in tears and said right on the spot, if you appoint me, it will completely destroy our religion. And Brother Lemoyne said, that's what Heavenly Father's telling me to do, is that you need to be, I'm not sure why, but you're called. And the reason behind why Brother Lynn said that it would split our group up, was because he had gotten in trouble with tax. Or, I don't know if it would be called tax fraud legally, but he took tithing money and used it for personal reasons and got himself into a lot of trouble. He personally did himself. He made a public apology about it. He took the legal consequence, everything that had to have been done when it first happened, not like immediate after it had happened. This wasn't like he did it after he was called. And there were also allegations of sexual misconduct that had happened years previously. So it caused a massive upheaval, a very big one for that reason. I would imagine more so for the sexual misconduct, of course, because the AUB has tried so hard to get away from that stigma. But nevertheless, he was, and my experience with him being in charge was that he did a good job of it. I know with the stuff that he was accused of, he wrote letters to those people. They're actually public domain, last I remembered. I can't remember the website at the top of my head, but I think those letters are public domain, the ones that he wrote and the ones that the lady wrote back to him. And I am told that he also turned himself into police just to make sure that the AUB was being upfront with the government about everything. So it's my understanding he did everything he could. As far as the nature of what actually happened and things like that, I'm honestly not sure.
Sure.
I've always adopted the mentality. We have this thing in our religion that came under Joseph Musser, actually. So maybe you've heard of it. Like it's called the Oath of Brotherhood. Mm-hmm. We just don't believe things about people unless we've spoken to them. So my mentality on it has been, I can't really talk to Brother Lynn about this directly. I can't directly figure this out. So I'm going to choose to, I hate to say not believe it, because that's a dangerous mentality to go down when it comes to sexual abuse or misconduct. So if I'm going to be 100% honest, that's kind of a cognitive dissonant area in my life there. Like, it didn't really match up. I felt like most likely there was some stuff that happened, but I don't know 100%. And I just kind of felt like I don't know the reasons behind it. I don't feel like, worst case scenario, he did do things, have sexual misconduct. And then I had to think about, well, would that take away the keys, the actual physical keys? Because in Mormonism, we're taught that the keys can be passed on, but you can still be a bad person but still have those keys to pass on. You know, they just wouldn't be able to actually exercise the rights of the priesthood because those operate on the principles of righteousness.
Right.
But everything I saw of him was he was a really good person. And like I read like the letters, and I feel like it wasn't like rape or like outright sexual misconduct, but more just really uncomfortable situations. And so I honestly just don't know what to think about all that. It has been an area of cognitive dissonance in my brain that I kind of had to work through. But I don't feel like I was never somebody that thought, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm in the right place here. I believed in the AUB so strongly that in my brain and the way I processed it in my head was, I'm just going to stay here. I don't know the answers to everything, but God will work it out in the end. Just keep trudging on. And that's what I did.
I need to throw kudos your way. It takes a little bit of fortitude, to say it nicely, to be able to admit that there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance there, because that's an uncomfortable place to be.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. You feel
there myself a few times. That's not an easy place to be whatsoever. And so to be able to admit that is fantastic. I do, I can't speak to what happened under Lynn Thompson's administration. A lot of what you said was pretty new to me. I think the fact that he turned himself into the authorities, I think is admirable, right?
Yeah. My understanding is that he really, really pushed to be forward, take accountability for the past mistakes that he had made.
I think
And my
thing that
experience, he was a really good leader from what I saw.
yeah, I was going to say, if anything, it shows a love for his people to
Mm-hmm.
go out there and say, you know what, this is on me, and
Yeah.
and not my people. So when
Mm-hmm.
he passes, who takes over then?
So Brother Lynn, I can't remember how many years it was. It had to have only been like 3 years, but he all of a sudden he did have congestive heart failure, but he honestly thought he was going to live for a long time. But he just randomly died really quick. It was really sudden. And then at that point, we have Brother Dave Watson, who is still currently the head of the priesthood for our group. And Brother Dave Watson is heavily loved individual. He really appeals to my generation, the millennials, and the upcoming generations. He'll say a lot of things that you just wouldn't expect someone like that to say, like I love watching Top Gun on Sunday and things like that. He's a very forgiving person, like just his whole nature. He's not intense by any means. He's really liked by our generation and tends to rifle some feathers with the older generation. But I absolutely love him. I think he's awesome. He's probably the first leadership person that's the head of our priesthood that I wish I had known as like best friends growing up.
Gotcha.
Great.
Gotcha.
But yeah, he's been in charge. I think it's only been like 1 year now. Can't remember. I think it's only been 1 year, so not long.
Okay. All right. Good deal. So that kind of catches us up on the history side. Now I'd like to talk about a little bit, if you're comfortable with it, maybe some of the culture and the practices around the AUB.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to throw some questions out there and we'll kind of run with those. So Adam God doctrine, is that something that you guys believe?
Yeah, that is definitely a big difference between us and the LDS Church. We absolutely 100% believe that. Yeah, it is something that's still considered pretty sacred to us. So I wouldn't say it's like heavily spoken about like in church and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely one of the core things that separate us for sure.
It's a beautiful doctrine. It really is.
Amen.
I did a 2-part series on the Adam God doctrine with Jacob Vidrine, who I felt had a really good handle on it. And that was some of the higher listened to and most download episodes, and it was like the first 2. And
awesome.
And some of the response I got back were absolutely amazing. And there's a large segment of my audience that is card-carrying, devout LDS folks. And some of the best feedback I ever got was, now the endowment makes so much more sense now that I understand this, right? And when you get down to things like the endowment, it really is a master class in Adam God doctrine, right? That's what it's really all about. And to me, it's just such a beautiful doctrine. It made God so much more approachable. He wasn't some distant figure somewhere. Now he was a dad.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I've always felt that way as well. It makes it a lot more personal. It's definitely a blasphemous concept to the rest of the Christian world.
Sure.
But it's definitely beautiful in Mormonism, and I wish the LDS Church took more of a dive into that to kind of get a little bit more of an understanding on that. I feel like for the most part, the LDS Church, at least on the scholarship aspect of the community of the LDS Church, is finally saying, yeah, Brigham Young did teach this. It's no longer like denied like it used to be. But I still feel like it's not understood by any means.
No. And what's been frustrating a little bit is once you understand Adam God doctrine, it opens up a bunch of other things too. Like right now, I know one of the things that some of the sisters in the LDS church are really struggling with is who's Heavenly Mother, right? And
Yeah.
funny, I'm like, well, we kind of have those answers, right? Like I feel like in some ways, fundamentalists are the monks, if you will, of Mormon, right? Because
Yeah.
we're keeping some of those old sacred truths alive, right? And my hope is that we can actually be of service to some of our LDS brothers and sisters when those questions come up, right? And we can say, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Here's something to look at. Maybe this will help. And I'm also a guy who believes that I would rather see someone stay in the LDS church if that's their desire than to just throw the baby out with the bathwater with Mormonism. So if the podcast helps people make sense of some of these older doctrines and that allows them to continue to serve in the LDS church and continue to walk that Mormon path, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Because some of these things have been shrouded in mystery for so long that they become scary. And then you have anti-Mormon individuals who will use just small excerpts from a larger sermon to use it against us almost. it's one of those things where I'm like, we just need to embrace this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
How about a missionary program? Do you guys have a missionary program?
So that's kind of like so because we believe the LDS church holds the rightful keys to the priesthood, so that would be a key that operates under the church.
Okay.
The ecclesiastical unit. So we believe the missionaries are doing that work. I desperately want to be a missionary. I think that just sounds so awesome, but I've never gotten that opportunity. So they're doing that basically with the AUB, and I would imagine this is probably the mentality for most fundamentalist Mormons. It's basically our job and our work. The work is also a name that we're known by, to keep everything alive, irrespective of the LDS church, which is kind of how it started with plural marriage, because we believe in the fullness of times. We believe that all the laws that have ever existed, all the laws under Heavenly Father, are supposed to be brought down now. And so basically it's our job to keep it alive. And it's kind of our prophetic narrative that eventually the LDS church and the priesthood will be reunited again, and we'll be back to one unit.
Okay. All right. So how do you guys gain converts then? Is this mainly people coming from the LDS church then who have these questions and they reach out to you?
Yeah, definitely mostly from the LDS church. We've gotten a couple people that come outside the LDS church, but generally what happens if you're outside the LDS church is you're told to go join the LDS church because for a couple of reasons, because you need to have an understanding of the basics, faith, repentance, things like that. And the LDS church is amazing at teaching those things and building character and just being trained to be good people. So they would stay there for a while, and then they do the discussions that we do, which isn't your typical like church discussions where you have 4 discussions and then the choice to be baptized after that. With us, it's a very long process. I don't know how long. I would imagine it's got to be like 6 months to a year, because it essentially, what happens is people join our religion and they have a go at it, and then they enter polygamy, and they just weren't at all prepared for it, and it just destroys their families. So there's a lot of hesitancy. People have to be really sure that they're 100% committed and really believe it. So it's definitely not easy to join the AUB. It's as far as what time goes, it takes a while. But yeah, mostly from the church though. People get their hands on things like the Journal of Discourses. That's actually how my dad was converted, because he's in your situation. Actually, he converted to the church and then started reading Journal of Discourses and slowly started getting curious about things he was reading there, and eventually found the AUB, and the rest is history.
So how do people that come out of the LDS church usually find you then? I mean, Is it hard to track down someone from the AUB to talk with folks, or?
Absolutely not. Yeah, I guess it might be difficult to know a member when you see them, because we generally are, for the most part, kind of keep it to ourselves. I'm an exception to that. I've always just loved talking about religion, so I'm a lot more open than your average AUB member. I would imagine it's got to be pretty easy though. Between just finding a name on Google, I mean, these days with the internet, you can find pretty much anything you want. But our communities also, they're very obvious that they're there, and we're not like a closed knit community. People know that we're there and see us around town in the public all the time. So I'm not an outsider, so I can't say, but I don't see how in the world it could be difficult to get a hold of somebody from the AUB if you were interested in pursuing that road.
Gotcha. Okay, now I'm going to ask about one that might be kind of a little more sensitive. Okay. And if you don't want to talk about, I'm good with that. But curse of Cain, are you guys a believer in the curse of Cain in that?
Yeah, I hesitate to say. Okay, well, let me just say this. I'm going to say what I think. Okay. My feelings on it.
Okay.
And just leave the AUB out of it specifically. These are my beliefs based on what I've read and my understanding. All right. So I do believe in the curse of Cain. So there is that issue with the Negro holding the priesthood, that we don't believe that they have rights to the priesthood at this time. We're definitely not racist, though. I know people are going to think, how is that not racist? But we believe that it all comes down to choices that they made in the pre-existence. So it's not like they have this curse because they're Black. They have the curse because of choices that were made in the pre-existence. It's all a matter of choice and consequence. We've actually had Black people in our religion in the past, believe it or not. People would be really surprised to hear that. We're very loving towards them. There's no racism. It's just the fact that we believe that it's the consequence of choices that were made. Gotcha. That's all it comes down to it. People don't think negatively about Black people. I mean, except for maybe one or two kooks that are in our religion, but you get that everywhere in the world.
Kooks everywhere. Doesn't matter which religion.
Yeah. But yeah, I can see from the worldly perspective that we would be classified as racist or alt-right, but the feelings that we have towards the Black community just don't exemplify that at all. And we have nothing to say about loving things. That's been my experience being in the AUB.
Fantastic.
But actual curse-wise, yeah, we do believe in it still.
Okay. All right. Cool. Moving on. What about temples? Do you guys have temples?
So we have So we have our what we call an endowment building, where it's not an official temple. I can't remember which ordinance it was, but there's a specific ordinance that separates or room. Maybe it's a room. I can't recall. Like the center room, like the Holy of Holies. So it's not an official temple, but we do all of ordinance work there, like baptism for the dead, marriage sealings, and things like that. That being said, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think there might be some type of reason that we don't have a temple, like a legal reason, because we're Mormon and you have the LDS Church. I'm not sure, because we actually have a temple in Mexico, like an official temple, but that's the only one. And so I'm not 100% sure on all the reasons behind that or why that is. So one in Mexico.
So it's more of an endowment house that you have in the States. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
That's exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, is vicarious work for the dead performed in that endowment house, or is that only for the living?
So we do the vicarious work for the dead, baptisms, the endowments for the dead, everything. Yep.
Okay. All right. Perfect. And then that one in Mexico, is that one still operating?
It is. So we have like I mentioned earlier, we actually have quite a few communities, but we have a good sized community down there in Mexico. I have not been there, but the leadership goes there quite often. Obviously, they have to. But I know members there because they marry like a person from the States. There's relations that form, and they end up moving over to the U.S. Amazing people. There's something about Mexican people over in Mexico where they're just extremely loving people. Different personalities for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me go here then with that. With those other communities, is it like for my LDS listeners here, would there be leadership down there like a stake presidency and that sort of thing? And then they report to the leadership in Utah? Is that kind of how that functions?
Yeah, that's exactly how it would function. With some differences, we're talking about LDS Church and how they would listen, or them listening to this. One of the big differences is that we don't believe the bishop would be the person in charge over the area. They would just be over the temporal affairs, and then we have a local high priest council, like your 3 high priests that run the area, and then the president of that local high priest council is the person that's in charge over that specific area.
Gotcha. Okay. But how now? And this is getting a little more sacred, so I expect a very general answer here.
Sure.
Are second anointings still available within the AUB?
Yeah, actually, I would say that probably wouldn't be something that I should answer, because I don't know if I should answer it or not.
Okay.
Because, like you're saying, it's definitely one of those sacreds, and even with a vague general idea of it, I'm honestly not sure on how far would be appropriate to go with talking about the specific one, other than what it is, because in that context we can just talk about history. Because I just wouldn't know what would be appropriate to say or not.
No.
I will say we believe in it. I'll say that.
Okay, perfect. So here's another touchy subject, but I think it's one that deserves some attention. Yeah. What about placement marriage? Is that something that's practiced in the AUB?
So when you say placement, you're talking about like arranged?
Yes.
So it has happened in the past, but not by force. And I have not heard of it happening in my day and age at all. From what I understand, my grandfather, Rulon Allred, had, in our belief, a lot of revelation from the Heavenly Father. And he would literally just get an inspiration and say, this couple, like you guys, I've had a revelation, you guys are supposed to be together. So my grandfather had that a couple times. I'm told that it was not common by any means. But now that just does not happen. I've never heard of that happen. I've definitely heard of some like recommendations. Like they'll say, this lady over here, her husband died, she's a widow, she needs somebody to care for her. Do you have room in your family type of a situation? You're talking it out and working it out. But as far as the actual arrange, like Heavenly Father says, you're supposed to be together, so you have to be together. That's never happened in the AUB.
Okay.
Yeah. I believe it happened under my great grandfather, John Y. Barlow, before the FLDS AUB split. And I think that's kind of one of those things that was causing some tension, because under John Y. Barlow, it was arranged marriages, and they wouldn't even tell the dad. It was just like, it's just what it was. So that caused a lot of tension, obviously.
So can I ask how most of those marriages then, what's dating and courtship like then in the AUB?
It's very, very case specific. Pretty much, I think every one of our leaders has at one point or another said there's no one right way to enter a polygamous relationship. Everybody does it differently. There's different circumstances involved. But I would say for the first wife, it's very, very just a run of the mill, how you would expect. You're dating, you're going out. I feel like we probably have much different standards compared to the world. That'll be a lot more in line with the LDS Church, with conduct and things like that. But then when it comes to, I should say, we are very traditional in, we believe, asking the father for the lady's hand in marriage. So we still do that. Even with the first wife, it's considered quite disrespectful if you don't do that.
Right.
But my father-in-law, when I came and asked him, he was very ecstatic, and it's just a sign of respect, help build that relationship between us. And I knew he was going to say yes anyway, so I didn't care.
Okay, gotcha.
But with the second, after that, when it comes to the polygamous marriages, there's a lot more protocol that has to be involved. It's a lot more stressful, obviously. And because you're a married man, that's dating another woman, so conduct and things like that is a lot different. And with those situations, it's recommended that you talk to your dad and get his advice and even approval. Though it seems like that's more of a recommended thing. I've never heard anybody say that you need to do that. But you do need to talk to the father, the lady's father, and you also need to speak with our apostleship, people that are in charge of our religion. You need to speak with somebody on that council specifically and hold a meeting with them. It's very intimidating and scary. At least it was for me. So
I'll bet.
Yeah.
So
you have to go through hoops. Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to make sense of this. So you get the desire that you want to enter the principle, and then at that point, do you find out if this lady would be amicable to it, or do you talk to her first, or do you go directly to the lady's father and the priesthood council? How does this work? Yeah,
definitely not a one size fits all. I've heard of all three of those different ways. Okay. It feels like, for the most part, and in my case also, is you just meet at church and somebody strikes your interest and one thing leads to another. So with my second wife, I actually felt interested years before I even told my first wife. And I chose to do that based upon polygamy, practicality things that my dad taught me about polygamy. Like, you don't go looking for other wives.
Sure.
But down the road, I have a degree in singing, and I did a singing class. I was going to have people in my community. I was going to, just do a little seminar on how to sing. And she joined it. And after one thing led to another, I ended up finding out she joined it just so she could get a chance to somehow instigate that starting point, because she was interested also. And it's really awkward and hard to know, like, because it's not traditional. Like, you're interested in someone, you just go up and say, I'm interested in you, because you have another wife there, and it could be disrespectful or offensive. It's really hard to know exactly how to broach it. So that's what she did. She ended up telling my wife that she was interested in us. And then my wife was, oh, well, we're interested in you, because I had told my wife at this point. So yeah, one thing led to another after that. That was a pretty hard process. Most plural marriages are hard processes to go through. Her dad really didn't think much of me at the time. Gotcha. Which I don't blame him, because I just moved to the area. I lived in a trailer and was kind of a bum at the time. And but I had to get myself together more.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
And so is this process like a year-long process to be able to enter into the principle, or is it just really case by case?
It is very case by case. If there is any tension or people that are disagreeing, they'll ask you to wait. It's usually a year. That's what it was for me. And just to kind of see what happens. and let things kind of evolve rather than just proceeding and breaking apart a family. So yeah, because in my case, because my second father-in-law was not gung-ho about it, he asked us to wait a year. I actually got really lucky though, because I didn't end up waiting a year. I ended up waiting half a year because something occurred that offended my father-in-law that people were saying about me. And my second father-in-law, he's just kind of weird, but for some reason that offense just made him feel bad, and he's like, you can marry her, I'm not going to do this anymore. So we married, and I can honestly say we have good feelings towards each other now. It's gotten not the same that it was when we first started.
That's awesome. That's absolutely awesome. So it sounds like, for the most part, until things get kind of serious, the leadership doesn't play a huge role in saying yes or no on those sorts of things. Is that a fair assessment?
Definitely not with the first wife. With the plural marriage wives, you do need to get their yes on it. Yep. Because ultimately, the priesthood is answerable spiritually for that polygamous families for actually doing that sealing. There's some responsibility that they take on in the spiritual sense. So if they want to have that confidence that the husband has it together enough to actually operate that family.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So
now, are there litmus tests as far as financial viability as well, or is it just a spiritual thing, or is it a combination of the two?
The spiritual aspect is definitely going to be 99% of it. Just throwing a number out there, obviously. Do you really have a testimony? Are you in this for the right reasons? Are you active? One of the biggest things that any father will check a man that's asking about their daughter is, do they pay their tithing? Because that's one of those things, like, where your money is, your heart is. So that's something that's always checked. But as far as like the things in the temporal world, from the spiritual aspect, like with the leadership, they're not going to say yes or no based on that. But there definitely are a lot of cases where the lady's father will be really hesitant because they don't want their daughter to grow up in squalor.
Sure.
And that was actually kind of my case, because I lived in a trailer when I first moved to the community here. That he had a lot of concerns about that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but if you're doing good for yourself financially, you'll definitely make the girl's father feel a lot better.
Gotcha. 10-4. Yep. I could see that. Look, as a dad of girls who aren't polygamous, who's got a couple married kids, that was a concern for me, right? I mean, you can't do the job, kiddo. I don't know what I'm going to tell you, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, we got a daughter too. I can feel that for sure. Yeah. I haven't reached that point yet, but I see it.
Oh, you wait. It's fun. Yeah. No, that's an entirely new experience that you'll get to have. So other than like plural marriage, Adam God, those big things that we hit, what else do you think really sets you apart from like the LDS church? What are some teachings or some practices or cultural things that are unique to the AUB?
Well, the first thing that automatically just jumps to my mind is more of the visibility thing. And that is, we do wear the traditional old school garment that we believe was first created. So you'll never see us with short sleeve shirts, or always long pants. People always ask, how can you stand that? It's 100 degrees outside. But you get used to it. Well, I think with dances, we are still really old school with our dances. We're still doing the waltz, the Virginia rail, and just very traditional. No modern music at all. Occasionally somebody's tried to put on modern music, and then somebody goes over and like, let's keep it traditional. Right. So yeah, we're very old school with our recreation and cultural things like that.
Good deal.
But I would say though, with things like movies and maybe music on a personal basis rather than a community activity, you do get a lot of variability. People have different opinions. I actually have a degree in music and did a massive report on music and ethics and morality. So I'm kind of interested in that subject. But that's a different subject. We'll go down that hole.
Sure.
Let's see. I think those are the only things that are coming to my head right at the front, as far as cultural differences go, because I feel like the AUB especially tends to blend in really well with the way most of society is. I don't think you'd recognize a lot of things unless you came to one of our dances. Then
Right.
that might be a different experience.
Sure. Well, and more power to you guys. I don't think I could dance. I think my two left feet would get in my way.
Yeah, I don't really go either. I did when I was younger because I wanted to be married. But as soon as I got married, I'm like, oh, done. Don't have to go anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm with you.
Now, early on, we talked about, you guys said you said that you guys had kind of your own educational system as well.
Yeah.
What's
So
that like?
in Hinesdale, where I grew up, we had a system 1 through 6. I think they actually have a high school system there now. And just so people are aware, I'm talking about like a fully legally accredited school system here. I think Hinesdale actually has a high school now, but I haven't been there in years. For Utah here, we have 2 private schools, one at Bluffdale and then one in Rocky Ridge. Most people are in fundamentalism probably familiar with Rocky Ridge out by Santaquin. We don't have one here in Mount Pleasant yet, though, unfortunately. People are talking about it. There's kind of like a base startup thing going with it, but it's not legal yet. So yeah, we do like to have that just so people, because what tends to happen in more cult societies is they grow up either without an education or not a legal education, and then they don't have a diploma. So we try and counter that and actually have a school system. And as far as the experience that it was, I was only in it for a couple of years, preschool through 2nd grade. My family, for one reason or another, was heavily made fun of, and we really struggled with bullying. So we were moved out in the public school system really fast.
Gotcha.
But from what I've seen now as an older person, they're very good school systems.
And they're fully accredited by the state?
I fully accredited, yeah. I personally wish I could have my son in one of the private schools, because apparently they're very rigorous, and I think it'd be awesome to be able to go through that type of a process. But it's too far from where I live, so.
Sure. And then what about higher education? Are you guys encouraged to go to college, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't say it's not like a forced thing by any means. It's probably like most people out in the world. Like, this would be a good idea if you want to do such and such a job. I don't see any differences with that whatsoever. I did get my degree in music, and then I went back to school to be a paramedic, and now I'm currently trying to be a physician assistant. Now it's called a physician associate.
Nice.
So I can specialize in emergency medicine. I'm just so yeah, a lot of people in my faith have college degrees. So.
Very cool. And that
I would say overall it's more recommended.
Yeah, no, I think that's cool. And look, it's one thing that I feel like Mormonism in general has lost. I think there's a few outliers, but the sense of building not just a church, but a society and a culture, right? And I feel like that was something that Joseph was definitely angling towards in his original mission, right? I remember I was living in Maryland at the time, and I was taking a few classes back there in Jacksonian America. And this college professor had said, okay, real quick, and you can't really talk about Jacksonian America without talking about the Mormons, right? It's just
yeah.
And he said a couple things in there that were very interesting, but one was he just kind of did this pop quiz as he was introducing Mormonism into the class, and I was the only Mormon in there. It's not like it is out west where you can't turn around without bumping into a Mormon. it gets pretty sparse once you're east of the Mississippi. But I remember I was in this class, and he said, okay, how many chapels did Joseph Smith build in his lifetime? Meeting houses. And hands went up, 100. No, that's not it. And it whittled down, and finally the professor just said 0. He built 0 chapels. He built temples and communities. And so being able to have those communities, you have to have people to staff them, so to speak, right? You need medical professionals, you need engineering, you need all those things to make a functioning society. So the fact you guys are still involved in that, I think is great. I think that's definitely something that's admirable, that I think as Mormons we all need to start looking at again, and getting back to that idea of building community, not just church buildings.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that, saying that about us. It's very nice.
So
there is an emphasis on trying to build those communities, as far as exactly with what you're talking about, to make sure, because we do try, like with United Order, to have like a specific local economy. So there's like an emphasis to make sure that we've got a doctor in the community, which we do. There's people with finance, and people with different businesses, so everybody's needs can be met. And just going along with what you're saying, everybody working together to meet everybody's needs to build a good local community.
Good deal. What about social media? Do you guys have like a website or a social media presence?
Not a public one. We have ones that are private, that are just for us, as far as communication and things like that go. But there is absolutely 0 media presence, unless I'm just really oblivious and I'm unaware. I've never heard of anything like that. Gotcha. I would say for the most part, social media is kind of one of those independent views. Everybody has a different take on it. But as far as leadership goes, and AUB as a whole, I don't feel like we've ever really taken a role in social media at all.
Okay. All right, cool. Is there anything else that you feel like is really unique to the AUB that we haven't gone over that you want to talk about?
Let me think about this for 1 sec. Actually, can we take a break?
Yeah.
And then, all right, that'll give me a chance to think about it for a minute, and I've got to go to the bathroom. So.
Oh, no problem. Yep, we can definitely pause this.
All right, cool.
Okay, so we're back. So one last question I have for you, Josh, is what about the word of wisdom? Is that something that's very similar to the LDS Church or to other fundamentalist groups? How do you guys practice that?
So with the word of wisdom, we really take the first part of that, not by way of commandment. So no one's ever held back by it in any means. I personally love coffee. I drink coffee almost every day. Yeah. And I kind of think that's a very fundamentalist thing, especially because it is preceded with that, not by way of commandment. That being said, it is taught, it's believed in, and there is an emphasis on it. I don't know about all fundamentalist groups, but in the AUB there is. But it's more like the spirit of the word of wisdom is to be healthy. Okay. So if you had one person that drank coffee, but exercised, ate good, all those things, in our faith, he would be someone that was really living the word of wisdom, as opposed to the other person that drank pop on the couch and was just being a bum watching TV, all day long. Yeah, even if he was not drinking coffee, not drinking tea, and obeying the verbatim part of the word of wisdom. So to us, it's the spirit of the law. A lot more goes in with that. It is a question that's asked in our interviewing process, like it recommends, but it's extremely it's essentially asked like this: do you feel like you're living the word of wisdom in the way that you understand it?
Yeah. And I can really respect that, because it's one of those things that made me laugh when I first moved to Utah, right? And not just when I became a fundamentalist, but when I moved to Utah, is that there was this talk about, the word of wisdom and that sort of thing. But yet, it was like they looked for loopholes, right? So it was like, okay, I don't drink coffee, but I'll have a gallon of the most sugary Mountain Dew soda you can imagine. And as I read the word of wisdom, and I tend to be both in my interpretation of scripture and the U.S. Constitution kind of a literalist, right? I think the words are there. So when it says by way of greeting, not commandment, I'm like, okay, so how do you skirt that, right? And so, just the overall picture of health is what I'm worried about, right? I'm a guy that likes to go to the gym. I feel like that's super important, right? Stay healthy, stay on top of your game. And I think there's a spirit to the law, definitely, as well as the letter of the law. And I think in something like that, it's one of those things that has to be looked at and accounted for.
Yep. That's one of those things that can be really dangerous. Our group feels can be dangerous with getting strict on. We feel like the LDS Church is too strict on it, which things like that always make me laugh because we're a fundamentalist cult religion. It's usually the other way around. But yeah, that one especially, it's just so much more a spirit of the law type of commandment.
Yeah, absolutely. It always made me laugh when I saw someone who couldn't walk 8 feet without passing out, but they would tell you you practice the word of wisdom. I'm like, I felt like the guy out of the Princess. I don't think this word means what you think it means, right? I think there's more to it. But anyway, dude, that does it for my question. I really appreciate being here. Nothing else you wanted to add or anything, Josh?
I can't think of anything at the top of my head. It was fun talking about it. So I've actually done something like this a couple of times at college classes as well for alternative religions. So, but it's been a while for me doing it.
Awesome.
I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you having, and I tell everybody this, and I mean it sincerely, and the same goes for you. If you ever, want to come back on, you have a standing invitation. All you need to do is reach out to me. You got my contact info. Keep that handy, and please feel free to reach out. Even if it's like, you're studying something and you feel like you want to share it, don't hesitate. I enjoyed talking to you. I think you're a heck of a nice guy, and I appreciate the time you took. All right.
I appreciate it, David. Thank you so much. You too.
All right. Bye, everybody.
You're listening to the Mormon Renegade Podcast.